Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with us. Before we get started,
Yeah.
don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel and that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Today, we're going to be tackling something
Yes.
super important, especially if you are a UPSC aspirant or a student
Okay.
gearing up for those environmental science exams, or just someone who wants to be more aware of India's incredible biodiversity.
Right.
We're going to be exploring
Yeah.
how India is working to protect its natural heritage.
We're talking protected areas, biosphere reserves, the whole conservation toolkit. It's crucial stuff, especially when you consider this alarming fact from the WWF Living Planet Report 2020. A 68% decline in global wildlife populations.
Wow.
We need to understand what's being done to reverse that trend.
Yeah.
And India is definitely at the forefront of these efforts.
Okay, so let's dive right in. We've got a lot to unpack here. We're going to untangle the web of protected areas in India, from national parks to community reserves, and even see how India is contributing to global conservation.
Exactly. Let's start with the most well-known types of protected areas.
Okay.
National parks and wildlife sanctuaries. What might surprise you is that there's actually a key difference between the two.
Yeah, I think a lot of people use those terms interchangeably. So what sets them apart?
Think of it this way. A national park is like Fort Knox for nature.
Okay.
It has the highest level of protection, with a primary focus on preserving the entire ecosystem within its boundaries. It's not just about protecting individual species, but about safeguarding the intricate web of life that makes up that habitat. A wildlife sanctuary, on the other hand, is more like a safe haven for particular species that might be vulnerable or threatened.
So it's like different levels of security
Actually,
based on what needs protecting.
the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, categorizes protected areas globally. National parks fall under Category 2.
No,
Which means they're all about ecosystem protection and minimizing human impact. Wildlife sanctuaries are categorized as Category 5, which allows for more managed use, like sustainable resource extraction by local communities, as long as it doesn't harm the species the sanctuary is meant to protect.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about finding the right balance between conservation and the needs of people living in and around these areas.
Absolutely. Take the Tulare Conservation Reserve, for example.
Okay.
It's this incredible protected area that actually connects protected areas in 3 states.
Wait, a protected area that spans 3 states?
It is.
That's amazing.
Goa and Karnataka, and it acts like a crucial wildlife corridor, allowing animals to move freely between these protected spaces.
It's like a wildlife highway connecting these protected islands of nature.
This is essential for maintaining healthy populations and genetic diversity, ensuring these animals can thrive for generations to come.
Okay, so we've explored these land-based protected areas. Now let's dive into the turquoise world of marine ecosystems. India has a vast coastline, and those underwater habitats are just as important to protect.
You're absolutely right. India's coastline is teeming with life, and it's a major focus for conservation efforts. That's where marine protected areas, or MPAs.
MPAs. Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down for me. What exactly are we talking about here?
Imagine setting aside specific areas in the ocean,
Okay.
just like national parks on land, where human activities are regulated to protect the marine environment. That's what an MPA is. Just like with land-based protected areas, MPAs in India are categorized based on their level of protection, ranging from Category 1, which is the most strictly protected, to Category IIB, which allows for sustainable use while still conserving biodiversity.
So there's a whole system for classifying marine protection as well. It sounds pretty complex.
It can be, but it's all about ensuring the right level of protection for different marine ecosystems. And then there's the Coastal Regulation Zone, or CRZ.
Ah, yes. The CRZ. I've definitely heard that term before. But honestly, I'm a little fuzzy on the details. Could you give us the rundown?
Of course. The CRZ notification is like a set of rules for development activities along the coast.
Okay.
It aims to protect delicate ecosystems like mangroves and coral reefs, while ensuring sustainable development for coastal communities. The entire coastal area is divided into 4 zones, from CRZ-I, which is the most ecologically sensitive, to CRZ-Bay, which includes the water areas up to the territorial limits.
So it's about striking that balance between utilizing coastal resources and ensuring they're protected for the long term. Did the most recent update in 2018 introduce any major changes?
Yes, the 2018 update did make some significant changes, like allowing for some tourism infrastructure in the No Development Zone, or NDZ. of CRZBI areas.
Okay.
But there's a catch. It has to be done with strict regulations to minimize the impact on the environment. It's a delicate balancing act. But it shows how India is adapting its conservation strategies to meet the challenges of a changing world.
It's all about finding ways for people and nature to thrive together. So we've covered national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, MPAs, and the CRZ. It seems like India has a really comprehensive system in place to protect its natural heritage.
It does, and it's not just about formal protected areas. There's another fascinating aspect of conservation in India that's deeply rooted in culture and tradition: sacred groves.
Sacred groves. That sounds intriguing. I've heard whispers about them. But tell me more.
Think of these as forests protected by local deities.
What makes this so special?
Imagine patches of forest,
Oh.
often undisturbed for centuries, considered sacred by local communities, and dedicated to local deities. That's the magic of sacred groves. This belief system has been a powerful force for conservation. People believe that disturbing these groves would anger the deity, leading to misfortune. It's like a cultural shield that has protected these areas for generations.
It's incredible how cultural practices have inadvertently contributed to biodiversity conservation. It's like conservation woven into the fabric of society. But are there different types of sacred groves?
There are. You have traditional groves where a village deity resides, often represented by a simple symbol. Then there are temple groves, created around temples, and even groves around burial or cremation grounds. Each one is unique and reflects the diverse cultural practices across India, all interwoven with nature.
It's like a tapestry of cultures and ecosystems.
Yeah.
And I bet there are regional variations in how these groves are called too.
You're absolutely right. They're called kavu in Malayalam, koyal kadu in Tamil, orans in Rajasthan, just to name a few. This highlights how deeply ingrained this tradition is across the country. It's a reminder that conservation isn't just about science and policy. It's about people, their beliefs, and their connection to the natural world.
That's such an important point. Okay, so we've explored sacred groves, these cultural havens of biodiversity. But are these groves facing any threats in today's world?
Unfortunately, you're right.
I mean, times are changing and development is happening everywhere.
Sacred groves, despite their cultural significance, aren't immune to the pressures of modern life. Rapid urbanization, development pressures, and even the weakening of traditional belief systems are putting these groves at risk.
That's sad to hear. So even cultural conservation needs support and protection in the face of these modern challenges. It's a reminder that we can't take these things for granted. But let's shift gears now to something a little more upbeat.
Okay.
Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture of conservation in India. Expert, tell me about biosphere reserves.
Okay, so picture this. Imagine designated areas recognized by UNESCO for their unique biodiversity and for their efforts to promote sustainable development. That's a biosphere reserve in a nutshell.
So they're like globally recognized superstars of conservation.
Exactly. And India launched its own National Biosphere Reserve Program, or NBRP, way back in 1986. This program promotes the conservation of ecosystems while also ensuring the well-being of local communities. It's a win-win for people and nature.
I love that. So how does a place qualify to become a biosphere reserve? What's the secret sauce?
Well, there are some specific criteria. It needs to have a core area,
Okay.
a pristine heart, if you will, that's protected and minimally disturbed. This core area needs to be able to sustain diverse life forms.
Okay, so there's got to be this pristine heart to the reserve. What else?
Well, you also need rare and endangered species, unique microclimatic conditions, and crucially, the involvement of local communities in conservation efforts. It's not just about setting land aside, it's about people and nature thriving together. That's a fundamental principle of biosphere reserves.
That's awesome. So how many of these biosphere reserves does India have?
India has 18 biosphere reserves spread across the country. And get this, 12 of them are recognized globally as part of UNESCO's Man and the Biosphere program.
Wow, 12 out of 18. That's pretty impressive. So these reserves are clearly doing something right.
They are. They showcase India's commitment to finding that balance between conservation and sustainable development. They're living examples of how people and nature can coexist and thrive. It's a model that's being studied and replicated around the world.
It's inspiring, really. Okay, so we've gone from the local level with sacred groves to the national level with biosphere reserves. Now let's go global.
Exactly. Let's talk about biodiversity hotspots.
Biodiversity hotspots. Okay, what are those?
These are regions with an exceptionally high concentration of endemic species.
Endemic species. That sounds pretty special. But I'm guessing these hotspots are facing some serious threats too, right?
Unfortunately, yes. meaning species found nowhere else on Earth. To be classified as a biodiversity hotspot, a region needs to have lost at least 70% of its original natural vegetation.
Wow, 70%. That's heartbreaking. So they're both incredibly valuable and incredibly vulnerable.
Exactly. Conservation International, a global conservation organization, considers these hotspots to be crucial areas where conservation efforts can have the most significant impact. It's like focusing on the front lines of the battle for biodiversity.
And where does India fit into this global picture? We're talking about global hotspots, so I'm guessing India has a role to play here.
India is actually home to 4 biodiversity hotspots.
4. That's a lot. Can you tell me everything? Which ones are they?
We've got the Himalayas, Indo-Burma, Sundaland, and the Western Ghats in Sri Lanka.
Okay, 4 hotspots. That's a lot of responsibility. It seems like India is a key player in global conservation efforts. This is all really fascinating stuff, and I'm sure it's super relevant for our UPSC aspirants out there.
Absolutely. Understanding these concepts, protected areas, biosphere reserves, biodiversity hotspots, it's all essential for anyone interested in India's environment and its global role in conservation.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today, but there's still so much more to explore, so stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll delve even deeper into India's amazing biodiversity and the efforts to protect it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into India's efforts to safeguard its incredible biodiversity. Before we move on, I want to quickly recap something we discussed in the last part, those remarkable areas called biodiversity hotspots.
Right. These are like the VIP lounges of biodiversity regions packed with unique species you won't find anywhere else. And we learned that India is home to not 1, not 2, but 4 of these hotspots.
Exactly. We have the Himalayas, Indo-Burma, Sundaland, and the Western Ghats in Sri Lanka. Each one is a treasure trove of endemic species, meaning they're found nowhere else on Earth. But they're also facing immense pressure from habitat loss, climate change, and other human-induced threats.
It's a sobering thought, but also a call to action. So let's break down each of these hotspots, starting with the Himalayas. What makes this region so unique in terms of biodiversity?
Well, the Himalayas are, of course, the highest mountain range in the world. They stretch across several countries, including India, and that dramatic landscape has resulted in a wide variety of habitats, from alpine meadows to lush forests. This diversity of ecosystems supports an incredible array of life.
It's like a vertical journey through different worlds, each with its own unique set of inhabitants.
Precisely. And because the Himalayas are so geographically isolated, many species have evolved in unique ways, adapting to the specific conditions of this incredible mountain range. Take, for instance, the snow leopard, an iconic symbol of the Himalayan ecosystem.
Ah, the snow leopard. Such a majestic creature, perfectly adapted to the harsh, high-altitude environment.
Exactly. And then there's the red panda, another charismatic species found in the eastern Himalayas. They rely almost entirely on specific bamboo species for food, making them especially vulnerable to habitat loss.
It's a reminder that protecting these hotspots isn't just about saving individual species, it's about safeguarding entire ecosystems and the delicate balance of life within them.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to remember that the Himalayas are more than just a stunning backdrop. They provide vital services to the entire region, regulating water flow and acting in a massive carbon sink, absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
So what happens in the Himalayas has implications that reach far beyond those majestic peaks. It really underscores the interconnectedness of our planet's systems. Now let's shift our focus to the Indo-Burma hotspot. Where exactly is this located, and what makes it stand out in terms of biodiversity?
The Indo-Burma hotspot covers a vast area, including northeast India, except for Assam, and extends into parts of several Southeast Asian countries like Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. It's a region of incredible biological and cultural diversity with a mix of forests, wetlands, and coastal ecosystems.
So we're talking about a region teeming with life, both in terms of its ecosystems and the people who call it home. What kind of unique species might we encounter there?
Well, one fascinating and unfortunately endangered creature found in the Indo-Burma hotspot is the hoolock gibbon.
The hoolock gibbon. Tell me more.
It's the only ape found in India, and sadly it's critically endangered due to habitat loss from deforestation and hunting. It's really a race against time to protect this incredible creature.
That's really sad to hear. But surely there are conservation efforts underway to protect the hoolock gibbon and its habitat.
Yes, there are. Organizations like the Wildlife Trust of India are working tirelessly to protect the remaining habitats and raise awareness about their plight. There's still hope, but it requires a concerted effort from governments, organizations, and local communities.
It's a reminder that conservation is a collaborative effort requiring dedication from individuals, communities, and organizations all working together. Okay, let's move on to our third hotspot, Sundaland. What can you tell us about this region?
Sundaland is a truly fascinating region that encompasses the islands of Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, the Philippines, and importantly for our discussion, the Nicobar group of islands in India. It's renowned for its incredible marine biodiversity with vibrant coral reefs, mangrove forests, and a vast array of fish species.
So it's a paradise for marine life.
Yeah.
What are some of the flagship species that call this hotspot home?
Sundaland is home to some iconic species like the orangutan, which is found on the islands of Borneo and Sumatra. Then there's the dugong, a fascinating marine mammal often referred to as the sea cow, due to its herbivorous diet of seagrass.
I've always been fascinated by dugongs. They seem so peaceful and gentle.
They are, but sadly, their populations are declining due to habitat loss, entanglement in fishing gear, and other human-induced pressures. Conservation efforts are focusing on protecting seagrass meadows and promoting responsible fishing practices.
It's another stark reminder that human activities can have a ripple effect impacting even the most remote and seemingly pristine ecosystems. Now let's turn our attention to our final Indian biodiversity hotspot, the Western Ghats in Sri Lanka. This one hits a bit closer to home for many of our listeners. What makes this region so special?
The Western Ghats are a mountain range that runs along the western coast of India, extending into Sri Lanka. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site and considered one of the 8 hottest hotspots in the world.
8 hottest hotspots, which sounds serious. What exactly does that mean?
It means that this region is incredibly rich in biodiversity, but is also facing exceptionally high levels of threat. The Western Ghats are home to over 5,000 plant species, 139 mammal species, 508 bird species, and countless other life forms.
Wow, that's an astounding level of biodiversity packed into a relatively small area.
It is. And the Western Ghats are home to iconic species like the Bengal tiger, the Asian elephant, and the Nilgiri tahr, which we discussed earlier. But they're also a haven for lesser-known species like the lion-tailed macaque, which is endemic to this region.
It's truly a treasure trove of unique and irreplaceable life forms. But you mentioned that this hotspot is facing a high level of threat. What are some of the biggest challenges to conservation in this region?
Habitat loss is a major issue in the Western Ghats, driven by deforestation, agricultural expansion, and urbanization. And climate change is adding another layer of complexity, potentially disrupting the delicate ecological balances that have existed for centuries.
It's a stark reminder that protecting these biodiversity hotspots isn't just about preserving the wonders of nature for their own sake. It's about safeguarding the future of our planet and the well-being of generations to come. We've covered a lot of ground in this episode, from national parks and sanctuaries to global biodiversity hotspots. It's clear that India is a major player in conservation efforts, both domestically and on the global stage.
It is. And I think it's really important to emphasize that conservation isn't just the responsibility of governments and large organizations. It's something we can all contribute to. Even small actions like reducing our ecological footprint, supporting sustainable practices, and raising awareness about conservation issues can make a difference.
Absolutely. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to the bigger picture. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into India's biodiversity conservation efforts. It's been quite a journey so far, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We've explored the incredible diversity of India's protected areas, from the majestic Himalayas to those culturally significant sacred groves. We even ventured into the turquoise depths of marine ecosystems and learned about India's 4 globally recognized biodiversity hotspots.
It's been a whirlwind tour of conservation Indian style. But before we wrap things up, I want to touch on something we briefly mentioned earlier: India's role in global conservation initiatives. It's not just about protecting its own biodiversity, right? India is actively involved on the international stage as well.
You're absolutely right. India is a signatory to several international agreements and programs that are crucial for biodiversity conservation on a global scale. One of the most significant of these is the Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD for short.
The CBD, I've definitely heard that term thrown around, but honestly, I'm not entirely sure what it entails. Can you give us a quick overview?
Of course. Think of the CBD as a kind of global treaty for protecting biodiversity. It was signed by over 150 countries at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro back in 1992. And guess what? India was one of the first countries to sign on, demonstrating its commitment to global conservation efforts right from the start.
That's really impressive. So what exactly does the CBD aim to achieve? What are its main goals?
The CBD has three main objectives: the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of its components, and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of genetic resources.
So it's not just about protecting species, it's also about ensuring that the benefits derived from biodiversity are shared fairly, especially for countries that are rich in genetic resources but may not have the resources to fully utilize them.
Exactly. And India has played a really active role in shaping the CBD's agenda and implementing its provisions at the national level. For example, India's National Biodiversity Act of 2002 is a direct outcome of the commitments made under the CBD.
That's a great example of how these international agreements can translate into concrete actions on the ground. It's not just talk, it's about making real change. Are there any other global initiatives that India is a part of?
Absolutely. India is also a signatory to CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna.
Ah, CITES. I've definitely heard of that one. It's all about regulating the trade of endangered species to prevent them from being exploited, right?
You got it. CITES plays a vital role in curbing the illegal wildlife trade, which is a major threat to biodiversity worldwide. India has been actively involved in CITES efforts to protect iconic and vulnerable species like tigers, elephants, and rhinos.
It's heartening to know that India is taking a stand against wildlife crime and working alongside other countries to protect these incredible creatures. This has been such an insightful deep dive into India's biodiversity conservation efforts. Expert, as we wrap up, what are some key takeaways you'd like our listeners to remember, especially those UPSC aspirants who are eager to ace their exams?
Well, first and foremost, remember the different categories of protected areas in India: national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, conservation reserves, and community reserves. Understanding the unique features and management strategies of each is crucial for anyone interested in environmental policy and conservation.
It's like a hierarchy of protection based on the ecological significance of different areas and the threats they face. It's about finding the right balance for each unique situation.
Exactly. And don't forget those four zones of the Coastal Regulation Zone notification and the key changes that were introduced in the 2018 update. This is a hot topic for UPSC exams as it highlights the complexities of balancing development and conservation in ecologically sensitive coastal areas.
It's a reminder that sustainable development isn't just a buzzword. It's a real-world challenge that requires careful consideration and innovative solutions.
And speaking of innovative solutions, don't forget those fascinating sacred groves we discussed earlier. They're a beautiful example of how traditional beliefs and cultural practices can contribute to biodiversity conservation.
It's really a testament to the wisdom of indigenous communities and their deep connection to the natural world. It shows that conservation can be woven into the fabric of society in really meaningful ways.
Absolutely. And finally, remember India's role as a key player in those global conservation initiatives like the CBD and CITES. Understanding these agreements and their implications for India is essential for anyone interested in environmental policy and governance, both domestically and internationally.
It's a reminder that conservation truly is a global effort, requiring collaboration and commitment from all nations. Expert, thank you so much for sharing your incredible knowledge with us today. This has been such an enlightening deep dive.
It's been my pleasure. I hope our listeners, especially those UPSC aspirants out there, feel empowered with a deeper understanding of India's biodiversity conservation efforts.
And for all our listeners, remember that conservation begins with awareness. The more we know about the challenges facing our planet's biodiversity, the more equipped we are to make informed choices and contribute to positive change.
Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged with the world around you.
And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more fascinating deep dives into the world of knowledge. Until next time, keep exploring.